So it's becoming clear to me why there is still hunger in this world. I've been looking at the USAID budget, um, and yeah, so they get about $50 billion every year to spend. That's what it got in 2023. They spent about $10 billion. Um, International security assistance was budgeted about $9 billion in 2023, of which foreign military financing to strengthen military support of key U.S. allies and partner governments was $6 billion. So about 20%, a little bit less than 20% of the budget was going to, pay for guns and security, military security, police security, um, military military forces in various countries. And which countries are these? Well, $17 billion of about $40 billion. Yeah. So this is kind of separated from the military budget, but if it matches up, if it's proportional to uh, this budget, this other $40 billion, then about almost half of the total budget goes to Europe and Eurasia. Why are we giving foreign aid to Europe? It's a relative. It's relatively well. It is a wealthy continent for the most part. I mean, there are some poorer places in Eastern Europe, but they're not hungry there. They're not suffering from food insecurity. Um, Not now. There are no long lasting civil wars outside of Ukraine. Um, so, and we have our own separate line items for Ukraine. I mean, we've sent hundreds of billions of dollars to that country as it is in various forms of aid. Um, and then, yeah, there's like $1.1 billion going to East Asia and Oceania. I'm hoping the vast majority of that is going to Oceania because East Asia doesn't need our help. Only $1.9 billion of this, about $40 billion, is going to South and Central Asia. South Asia, a lot of it is just outside of sub-Saharan Africa. South Asia is like maybe the worst mess in the world. You've got Myanmar, which is a terrible place to be right now, but because you got sub-Saharan Africa, you've got South Asia, and you've got Myanmar, um, and maybe some places in Latin America. Well, not many, because of the lack of ongoing like furious civil wars there outside of Haiti. Was a crazy mess last year. Thousands of people were killed by gangs last year in Haiti. Nobody reported on it, and the United States did not provide hardly any aid or any help to quell the gang violence there. It got so bad that the civilians were picking up machetes and, uh, massacring gang members on their own because they weren't getting any help. The police were not there. There were no police. There was nothing. And the United States did very little to help the Haitian people, except for to open up our borders and let people in without asking them who they were. Of course, there were no filters on whether these were gang members coming in from Haiti or not. Anyhow, so the Western Hemisphere only got like $1.8 billion, and I would hope that the vast majority of that went to Haiti, but I don't think it did, because after listening to some of the things that were being paid for um, by USAID, a lot of the money spent by USAID is basically just giving cash to governments. So, the largest sector of this 40 something billion dollars uh, outside of the military aid went to quote unquote governance. So $16.8 billion went to governance. Um, and the general nature of aid to foreign nations, starting with the with Obama and Bush, it started going more and more. It went G to G, basically our government to their government. So, um, and that's a pretty quick way of wasting your money in sub-Saharan Africa. If you give the South African government, or the Congolese government money, um, very likely it's just gonna end up in someone's pocket. Um, uh, so that's a really quick way of just wasting cash. Um, there was money spent on health initiatives, $7 billion in this 2023 budget, and I think that's probably the best work from what I've read so far of the USAID. Bush, the second Bush, started a lot of anti-AIDS programs in Africa, and they supposedly have been quite successful, which is great. But at the same time, I'm looking at you know all these billions of dollars, and very few of the billions of dollars is actually going to fighting hunger, malnutrition, and food insecurity. Um, which is probably the most efficient way of helping people, helping the civilian population. But back in the early 2000s, AIDS was still a huge monster in the world. It was very a scary boogeyman, and I think that a lot of Americans definitely did not want the AIDS epidemic to sort of overwhelm the United States. And so, there was a lot of support. It was a bipartisan support to, try to quell the AIDS epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa. Obviously, you probably could have, not obviously, but you probably could have gone a long ways to just completely abolishing hunger in the world, with the same amount of money. It's if you were talking about saving lives, the quickest way of saving lives is, just getting food to people who are in hunger. And of course, like I've talked about in other videos, the biggest problem in getting in fighting hunger is not that there's not enough food. There's plenty of food in the world. The problem is getting the food to the hungry people, and then also setting up food systems in which food is regularly, sent from places that grow it to the people who need it within one nation, so that there doesn't have to be large amounts of food imported, or food that is inefficiently distributed, such that the people who most need it can't access it, or can't afford it. And so you need really strong transportation systems to do that. One of the things that has really worked, I think, over the past 10 years or so is the things like the Chinese initiatives in like building railroads, building highways, building airports, building communication systems, such that first you get, with the communication systems, at least first where the hungry people are. And then with like for instance, there was a railroad built in Ethiopia that basically, you know, cut the time of transport from like the coast to, the inner parts of Ethiopia by like, you know, like 85% or something like that. I mean, that's just crazy. So, I mean, one of the problems with transporting food is that it can rot on the way if it takes too long. It takes 6 days to get from, you know, uh, the port to the people. You know, there's only certain types of food that you can, that you can send. refrigerated trucks are really important in food security and things like this. And if you don't have a highway uh, to have the refrigerator, if you don't have the refrigerated trucks and you don't have the highways to have them drive on safe highways, then it's just a huge mess. So I don't see anything in here. I see like in their budget, $1.3 billion for agriculture. That should help. The most important thing is not for us to send our food from the United States, our surpluses, to sub-Saharan Africa, but rather it's best for the Africans in those individual specific nations to grow the food themselves and not even have to import it from neighboring African nations. So the $1.3 billion in agricultural aid is helpful. I just don't know if much of it was spent in the ways that it should have been spent and in the places that it needed to be spent in, and is a tiny, tiny part of the overall USAID budget, which also included a bunch of ridiculous things, you know, tens of millions of dollars for like Sesame Street episodes and DEI programs in other countries. Just some really crazy stuff that got money because it was, something that sounded like really attractive to certain parts of the political spectrum. So if they're spending tens of millions of dollars, if they sent money for Wuhan, for the Wuhan labs to develop, new viruses, or to study new viruses, at least. I mean, they're just spending money on some crazy stuff. And so I have no faith whatsoever that they have in their spine, in their culture, that one of their goals is to abolish hunger and malnutrition, and undernourishment in the world. That's why I think, even though we can spend $50 billion on quote unquote USAID, USAID for the world, and we still have hundreds of millions of people struggling with hunger in this world. The $50 billion a year easily abolishes the vast majority of global hunger, undernourishment, malnutrition, food insecurity, and would probably help to develop permanent agricultural and transportation systems throughout the world that could, permanently end global hunger. But instead, we're spending it on all sorts of stuff. You got $3.5 billion for administration. You do have the $10.5 billion for humanitarian aid, but then again, like I said, almost half of it is going to Europe, and if it's split up according to the region, as it looks like, you've got like 40% of it going to Europe and Eurasia. And if it's government to government, you send some humanitarian aid to the government of Nigeria. You don't know where that's going. You send it to the government of Somalia. Who knows where that's getting to? If USAID simply gave $50 billion each year to World Food Program, the United Nations agency that is dedicated solely to fighting hunger and undernourishment and stunted growth due to undernourishment. They're dedicated to providing proteins and vitamins to kids who need them. They're dedicated to making sure that kids don't die of diarrhea because of bad water, unclean water, and things like this. If they just gave the $50 billion to the World Food Program, there would be no more hunger in this world. Of course, there'd be some places in war zones where food would have to be sort of airdropped, but with the $50 billion you could develop each year, a $50 billion injection each year, you could develop uh, a mobile air force of airplanes and helicopters to just drop food in or around places where uh, people were dying of hunger in war zones. Yeah, if you weren't able to truck the food in, like in Gaza, where food trucks are being blocked and there's not enough food trucks getting in, this $50 billion could easily pay for some airplanes and the food. Of course, the food is the cheapest part of it. Um, but yeah, you can have an aircraft carrier, even just going around the world. Having airplanes take off, uh, or you just set up airstrips near the war zones. Set up an airstrip in Jordan, load it up with food, drop it in some deserted areas in Palestine and in Gaza. Um, yeah, it's 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 not that difficult to end global hunger. It's the easiest thing to end. It's a lot easier than cutting HIV in half. It's a lot easier to end hunger than ending war. It's a lot easier to end global hunger than it is to make everyone literate or to abolish um, a, a lot of diseases that we've been trying to abolish. Um, that being said, uh, salute to Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, who dedicated many decades of his life to ending diseases like guinea worm. And yeah, I mean, he made just absolute tremendous progress in all of these areas. And with a pretty small budget, he didn't have, you know, he didn't have $50 billion to work with. And he was able to make miracles happen. But he's not USAID. He doesn't just have a vacuum on top of on top of the American tax revenues. He can just suck up $50 billion and just blow it out all over the world to, like, literally thousands upon thousands of groups and individuals and governments, according to what they think is right, and which governments they like, and which regions they like, and which non-governmental organizations they like, and what little pet causes they like. I'm beginning to understand why there's still global hunger. Why is there still hunger? Why?